Zacchaeus was a tax man. That's what the title of the hymn is that we'll be singing in a little while. And it's one of two things that we're told about him, the other being his height. A bit of trivia for you, the average male in the first century Palestine was 5'4". Today the average is 5'9". So I'm guessing he was pretty short by our standards, if he was short from their standard. Being short, of course, he climbed up a tree so he could see over the crowd and coincidentally where Jesus could see him. And seeing him up in the tree, Jesus did something that not just the Pharisees had trouble with. Everybody had a problem with this. Tax collectors were collaborators with the Roman oppressor, often involuntarily, but still, they were collaborators. They were known to overcharge and skim off the top, thus defrauding both the Jews who paid the taxes and the empire that received them. Tax collectors were always classed with harlots, gamblers, and thieves, people who lived promiscuous, lawless lives. According to the rabbis, there was no hope for the tax collector. They couldn't go to the temple. They couldn't associate with most other people in the community. Even their money was refused in the temple. They couldn't even pay a tithe. Tax collectors were even more unclean than lepers. No one would associate with them. But Jesus said, Zacchaeus, come down from there. I must stay in your home today. Way to upset the crowd, Jesus. Having dinner with somebody that everybody hated. And then we come to the interesting bit, and the reason we need to look at different translations of the Bible. And Charlotte, I had a heart attack when you changed it. Because this is, luckily, the one that Charlotte read agreed with the one that was on the screen. Different translators don't always agree, you see, on how to translate specific parts. And so the part that Charlotte didn't read, but was close, said, Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much. The New Revised Standard Version, on the other hand, says Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half my possessions I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will repay 4 times as much. You will notice a difference in the Common English Bible and the Message. Zacchaeus speaks in the present tense. These are things he does. In the New Revised Standard Version, he speaks in the future, things he will do. Depending on which translation you read, and I don't even know how many of them there are, but many, many, Zacchaeus was either already behaving more ethically than the vast majority of tax collectors, or he decided to change his behavior and begin to treat people more ethically. Either he was an ethical man in a crooked business, or he was reformed by Christ and would become an ethical man in a crooked business. Typically, this passage is preached from the second viewpoint, and the song we'll sing also comes from the second viewpoint. But let's give the first a little consideration. Because ethical dilemmas abound in our daily lives, even when we are not engaged in questionable behavior or working in a crooked business. Kirk Franklin is a Grammy Award-winning gospel artist, a singer and songwriter. He was named Best Gospel Artist at the Dove Awards on TBN twice. But he's boycotting Trinity Broadcasting Network, the Gospel Music Association, all future Dove Award shows, and all affiliated events, after comments that he had made about a recent police shooting were edited out of his acceptance speech. And it's not the first time the same thing had happened at previous award shows. It's not like he said anything unchristian or political or otherwise offensive. He named the victim, and he said, I'm just asking that we send our prayers for her family and for his. And I'm asking that we send our prayers for that 8-year-old little boy that saw the tragedy. And we just lift them up, and I'm asking that you pray with us. Just pray mercy and grace over their lives in the name of Christ our King. He was asking for prayer for the victim and the shooter and both their families. I can't see anything wrong with that. I really can't. It's kind of, classic love your neighbor stuff. But when his acceptance speech was aired, that portion had been cut out. Now, I don't know much about the Christian music world or the gospel music world, but I suspect that a gospel singer who turns his back on TBN and the Gospel Music Association just might be doing something significant. Kirk Franklin had to decide whether his career or his ethics came first. He chose his ethics. He chose the harder path. I have to wonder, too, about the ethics of the video editor at TBN who decided to cut this sincerely meant prayer out of his speech. But the entertainment business has never been known as the most ethical of all businesses. One would hope TBN would be different, though. While researching for today's message, I came across an outstanding quote about Christ's transformative power, and then I looked up the author. When I looked up the author of that quote, I had to stop and decide whether I could, in good conscience, quote this person. She is rabidly anti-LGBTQ. She promotes all kinds of terrible, ugly conspiracy theories. And those beautiful words that I found were part of a hateful rant she had posted. I could just use those words, and not say where I got them, but that's plagiarism, and plagiarism is bad. It's stealing. I could not in good conscience quote a person who hates so strongly in a message about the Christ who loves everyone and welcomes everyone and rejects no one, not even a tax collector. Back to Zacchaeus. Whether he was already doing the right things or made that decision because of Jesus, he was still a tax collector. He was still working in and for a corrupt system. A person that no church-going person would want anything to do with. His status as an outcast, as far as the temple was concerned, wasn't going to change just because he behaved justly and ethically. As long as he continued in this occupation, he would be rejected. The attitude of the temple and the rabbis was, you cannot be a tax collector and a religious Jew at the same time, a righteous Jew at the same time. And it's not like a tax collector for the Roman Empire could just quit his job. Not if he wanted to keep his possessions and his family and his freedom and, his life. They didn't let you quit. In many ways, it would be a lot like trying to leave a crime family, which, according to books and movies, is not conducive to a long and healthy life. Jesus did not see things quite the same way the Pharisees and the rabbis did. We already know that, of course. He hung out with people that good church folks avoided. Earlier in Luke's Gospel, when the Pharisees asked, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus answered, healthy people don't need a doctor, but sick people do. I didn't come to call righteous people, but sinners, to change their hearts and lives. He spent his time with people on the margins, people on the outside looking in, people who felt alone and unwanted. There are way too many of those people in Jesus' time. The people who couldn't afford to pay for the sacrifices they needed to make in order to be cleansed after an illness or having a baby or whatever health condition made them unacceptable inside the temple. A man with a skin rash or the woman with the hemorrhage. People were not accepted who fell into certain occupational categories like tax collectors, prostitutes, loan sharks, gamblers. These were not allowed to come to worship or make sacrifices or tithe. They weren't even allowed to hang out with people who did go to temple for fear that they would corrupt them. Even if they behaved justly and ethically like Zacchaeus, the rabbis and the temple said they just weren't welcome. Sadly, we know that this is still a thing. I was having a conversation online the other day about Christianity, And one of the people in that conversation said, I used to go to church. I don't anymore. I miss it. But I was told you can't be a Christian and that thing that you do at the same time. Way too many church people say things like that. The thing about being a Christian, you see, is that we're not perfect people. Or as I've seen it said on Facebook, a church is not a museum for good people. It is a hospital for the broken. We don't get to decide who Jesus will and will not accept. I mean, look at the man's friends. People who were not welcomed by the establishment. People who had been told repeatedly, you cannot be whatever you are and come to the temple. You can't. Jesus was not in the business of making the unclean acceptable to the temple. He was in the business of healing the broken and of bringing salvation to the lost. He was about changing people's hearts. He was about having dinner with sinners and inviting into the kingdom all who seek him, like Zacchaeus, like us. Amen.